Good morning and welcome to another Rose Red Homestead class, RRH class. And if this is your first time at one of our classes, know that these videos are a little bit longer, close to an hour, and that they are run more like a university classroom. We will have discussions and writing on the board, along with there is an information sheet you will need to download for this video. Now on the information sheet there are a couple of more links to the recipes that we're going to use today, and you will really want to have those in front of you. You will get more out of this video if you have those recipes in front of you, and they're about halfway down, about right here. So if you haven't done that, you might want to pause the video and then come back when you are ready. So this information sheet, you can find it on our web page, and I'm putting the address right here. You just go to the very first page when you click that link and scroll down to RRH classes, and you will see the downloadable handout that is called Making and Preserving Cream Soups. It's right there for you. It's a Word document. So just download it. You can print it. You can type your own notes on it because it's available for you to be able to edit as well. And then while it's up on your computer or your phone, whatever you're looking at, you can click these links and get those recipes. The topics for these classes that Jim and I are doing come from you. We ask for you to give us ideas about videos, classes, full-blown classes, 1-hour classes that you would like for us to present on topics that are of interest to you. We have had several people request this very video because they want shelf-stable cream soups in their food storage. One of our viewers said, I want something that my teenager can just come home from school and dump in a cup and put in the microwave and have cream soup. And so we have a solution for that. Now we're going to start with what our learning outcomes are for today, and those are at the top of your information sheet. We are going to, now my responsibility is to present the information for these learning outcomes. Your responsibility is to take from that the knowledge that you need according to your own personal goals for cream soups. So we're going to prepare cream soups for freezing and or freeze drying. We're going to learn to adjust cream soup recipes for pressure canning. Then we're actually going to pressure can both soups that we're going to be working with today, and then we will let them cool long enough to be able to open one of the jars and prepare it for serving. Those are all really important things. On our YouTube channel, we really follow the USDA guidelines. We want ourselves, our families, and all of our viewers to be very, very safe when they work with particularly pressure canning foods because of the danger of botulism. And I've done a lot on botulism. I've done a video that is resurging in popularity called Annihilate Botulism. It's now one of our top watched videos. It was done a couple of years ago and it is resurging, so I think people are thinking more about that. So we'll be talking just a little bit about that. But we will be following USDA guidelines. But there are ways that we can prepare cream soups for shelf stability to be able to store in our food storage. So first of all, the easiest way possible is just to go to the store and buy commercial soups. And I'm going to add that to our list because it is a possibility. It does not fall in the realm of making, but we're going to list it anyway. So this is commercial soups. And that is both dry and canned. And I have some examples of that right here. This is a Bear Creek soup packet. It's potato cream soup, and it makes 2 quarts. So this would be enough for easily for a family of 4 to have a really nice helping of cream of potato soup. And this was $3.50, which probably isn't too bad. If you're going to have soup for a meal and add some nice crusty bread with that, $3.50 for a family of 4, that wouldn't be too bad. And then I'm very familiar, and many of you probably are as well, with canned soups. And I have those on our food storage shelf. I don't have a lot of these dried soup. In fact, this is the only one I own in terms of packaged dry soups. But I do have a lot of these on our food storage shelf because I use them all the time in other recipes. Cream of mushroom, cream of chicken, cream of celery. And this is a tomato soup that when you add milk to it, it becomes cream of tomato. So that's one way to do it. That is not the way we're going to be learning about today. So I'm going to set the commercial stuff aside. Next in line on our list are the do it yourself. And that's the making part right here. And the first one we're going to consider is dry mixes. Dry soup mixes are really wonderful to have on your shelf, but they take some advanced preparation, and that is beyond the scope of this video because I've already done 2 videos on how to do that. The first video is, and these links are on your information sheet. The first link is how to dehydrate and freeze dry veggies because you need to have the vegetables dry. Then you run them through your blender or your food processor and powder them, and then you mix together the powders into all kinds of delicious soups. Now in the one video that is called Instant Soups with Powdered Veggies, that particular link will give you 4 recipes. And here are 3 of those 4 recipes right now. Now, the other alternative is, this is my notebook that has several of our books in it because I run copies and just keep them like this too. And so the one that I'm going to talk to you about for just a minute is this particular one, which is Dry Mix
meals in jars.
That would be it. I'm trying to read it upside down. Dry mix meals in jars. And in this particular book, and I think it is actually the very first chapter, I talk about dry mix soups. Vegetable powder instant soup starting on page 11. Creamy asparagus soup, potato leek soup, broccoli cheddar soup, zucchini cheddar soup, tomato celery soup, and beet velvet soup. Every one of those is a creamed soup because part of the recipe is adding powdered milk, adding that dairy to it. So I have 3 of those soups right here. I'm going to pull them forward. So this is cream of asparagus soup, and this would be your powdered milk right here, and this would be potato powder. Now when I say potato powder, that is the same thing as unflavored potato flakes. You can just run that right through your blender and get this potato powder. And this is the thickener for these soups. You can also substitute arrowroot, but this is cream of asparagus soup. This is beet velvet soup, which is a cream soup, and this is tomato celery soup, which is also a cream soup. Then, for that viewer who just wanted some packets for her teenage children to just pop into a cup and add a cup of water and then microwave it and have cream soups, what we can do, now each one of these makes 1 quart. You add 1 quart of chicken or vegetable broth to these. You can either add water, 1 quart, and then when you get them mixed up according to the recipe, and you'll notice a pattern on those recipes. And if you follow that pattern in terms of the amount of the potato powder and the vegetable powder and the dry milk powder, those are pretty constant across all of my recipes. Then you can mix and match your own. Then when you get your soup mixed up, you can weigh it. Remember, it makes a quart. And then you can divide that weight, and I always use grams. It's so much easier. The numbers are easier to work with when you do grams. Then divide that number in fourths and package it in these little 1/2 cup servings, and you have a 1 cup serving. Now, what do you do about the broth or the water? Well, I've put a teaspoon of chicken broth right there, and that's what it takes to make 1 cup of chicken broth. And so your family member would just boil a cup of water, put it in the cup, add one of these little packets, and boom, instant soup right there. So this is asparagus and this is broccoli cheddar. So these are the dry soups that you can do yourself with links to how to do those, which are not going to be a part of this class. So I'm going to set these aside. Next on our list is to make the regular recipe. So what can we do to make the regular recipe made according to the recipe? What can we do to make that soup stable? Well, we can freeze it. Freeze dry it. I'm just going to abbreviate that if you have a freeze dryer, or you can refrigerate it. And I have examples right here. So this is the cream of chicken soup, and I'll be talking about these recipes more in just a minute. This is the cream of mushroom soup right here, and this is the cream of chicken soup right here. Right out of the pan when it was hot, I let it cool, put it in these containers, and it went right in the refrigerator. And this will last 4 or 5 days. Now, most of us want a longer term storage than that, but this would do for your teenagers to come and scoop up how much they want and just heat in the microwave as is. Or you could pre-package it, even putting it in cups and put it in the refrigerator. So all they have to do is grab a cup, put it in the microwave and heat it. So that would be one way. The other thing I did with the regular recipe was I just spooned some right into a quart baggie and I froze it. I laid these flat in the freezer and froze them. Now, I've had these out for a few minutes and so they're starting to thaw, which we want for them to thaw. But you could do this in a meal-sized portion for your whole family or individual serving portion for your children to have in the freezer. They thaw really fast. And you could, in fact, almost heat them right in these bags, but you would need to open the bag just a little bit to allow the steam escape so it doesn't blow up in your microwave. And then for those of you that have freeze dryers, these both are freeze dried. And I took about 3 cups of each from the original time that I made the recipe. Now, we haven't eaten any of the original recipe. So the original recipe on the mushroom made this freeze-dried, this for the refrigerator, and this for the freezer. Now, the chicken made 2 of these, and 1 of these and this one. So the chicken is going to make a little bit more. But there are many ways that you can do just the regular recipe, and you don't have to worry about what the USDA says about some of these things that you can't do when you can. Now, what we are going to do at the end is we are going to taste test the freeze-dried. This, I have to admit, both Jim and I taste tested these. These are luscious soups. We loved both of them. So we're going to compare how they do across these 3 ways and then with the canning that we are going to do. And that brings us to the next way that we can do it ourselves, make the regular recipe as opposed to adjust the recipe for canning. And this is where we are going to be spending the rest of our time today, because we are going to make both soups so that we can can them, and then we're going to go ahead and can them. So this pretty much, this number 2, is how we're going to make preserved cream soups for our food storage. Dry mixes, make the regular recipe and freeze, or freeze dry it, or refrigerate it, and then to adjust the recipe for canning. Now, here is where a little bit of work comes in. And from my perspective, it is once you get the hang of how to do this, it becomes very, very easy. And the USDA has accommodated us by publishing a way that we can safely can our own soup recipes. Well, you won't find a USDA tested recipe for what we're going to be doing today, but we have the USDA recommended process for how to do that. And if we follow their guidelines, we can safely can, but there are some pretty big caveats that we need to understand, and I've put a link to this document right here on your information sheet. And this tells you how that you can your own soup recipe, but there are some pretty big cautions. Now, the other link that I have on that, on the information sheet is to a website that is one of my go-to recipes. I trust what they say because they do a great job of gathering valid research from a lot of different sources and publishing how to can this, how to can that. Well, they have how to can the USDA guidelines, your own soup recipe, but it's a lot more in detail than this page is. So it fills in a lot of the blanks, gives you a lot of other references that you can research and really understand, because before we can just sit down with a recipe and adjust, there are some pretty important things that we need to understand. All right, so I'm going to switch boards. Right here on this page, it says, caution, do not add noodles or other pasta, rice, flour, cream, milk, or other thickening agents to home canned soups. If dried beans or peas are used, they must be fully rehydrated first. All right, so I want to talk about this for just a moment. I am preparing myself to do a series of videos on making cheese using powdered milk. And so I have been out on the internet a lot, more so than I have recently. And I have just been appalled by so many things that I see out there. In fact, was it yesterday, Jim, that I was sitting there and I said out loud, "You have got to be kidding me." And you came in to see what the commotion was about, because I had found a website where the person who was leading the discussion just said things that were scientifically not just a little bit of error, they were downright false, and they were downright dangerous. And so I have done a video on the canning police and cowboy canners, both to avoid at all costs. But here is the thing about why we cannot use these in our homemade soups that we want to can. Noodles, pasta, rice, flour, and other thickening agents, and that's clear gel, that's everything. It's arrowroot, it is cornstarch, it is anything as a thickener. Cream, milk, or other dairy, and then I've added large amounts of fat. And while they don't specifically say that, I know from other things, and what they say is to look up how to can these other things, because the USDA is always saying trim off the fat, skim the fat, rinse the fat off. And so a little bit of fat is okay, but not in large amounts. Why? What's the matter with these things? Well, noodles and pasta just almost disintegrate, and they thicken up the liquid. I'm going to stop myself here just a minute, and I want to give you a little metaphor. So my dad was a university professor. He was at BYU for years and years. And Mother and Dad would, sometimes in the summers, Dad was offered to teach a class abroad. And so Mother and Dad would go, and it would be a 2-week class or a 4-week class. And Mother loved to travel, she loved art, and she loved to bring home mementos from their travels. Well, one of the times she brought home a bell, and it was about as big around as my fist. And when she brought it out to show all of us, and we were all still at home at that time, kind of an older teenager, I remember this because it was my responsibility to kind of watch the rest of the children while Mother and Dad were gone. And so she set it out on the coffee table in the living room. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, it's an elephant bell. And I've told this story before, but I'm going to repeat this story because it's such an excellent metaphor. And I said, an elephant bell, what does it do? You put it on an elephant? No, no, no. And she picked it up and she rang it. She said, it scares the elephants away. And I said, does it work? And my mother, who had such a delightful sense of humor, said, well, you don't see any elephants around here, do you? So that metaphor for me is a lot like canning and ignoring this stuff. Because I tell you, when I was out on the internet recently, I saw over half of these things violated by people. And one was a homestead person who said you can can potatoes putting no liquid in the jar and they turn out so much better. And we've never gotten sick. Well, it's like the elephant bell. If there are no elephants around, then you ring the bell and you say, well, it drives the elephants away. Who's to dispute that it wasn't that? Except it wasn't that because there were no elephants around. And that's the same thing. You can link that elephant bell to whatever improper thing you are going to be putting in or doing with your canning. And you can say, well, I've done this. Here I'm ringing my elephant bell. I've done that and none of us have ever gotten sick. Well, that was most likely because there were no botulism spores in the food that you canned. It was not because it was a safe way of canning. And so that is why I follow USDA guidelines as closely as I do, because I'm not going to be ringing any elephant bells when I do my canning. So noodles and pasta thicken up that liquid. And that person who said dry potatoes without any liquid in the jar turn out so much better. Oh my goodness. In fact, Jim, that's what I said. You have got to be kidding me. Because the liquid in the jar is part of a tested canning recipe. And people who just shortcut like that do not understand the critical importance of heat transfer. That liquid is the medium through which heat transfers to the very center part of the thickest piece of food that is in that jar. And unless that center of that piece of food gets up to 240 degrees and maintains it for a while, then we cannot be assured that botulism spores are killed. And so don't do it. Don't do this. And rice is notorious. Don't ever can rice. Flour and thickening thickens up the liquid to where heat transfer cannot occur. Cream, milk, and dairy, this one is violated so much across the internet. And people kind of make fun of the USDA because, they haven't tested it and that's the only reason, so you can go ahead and do it. And it's not because they say no, it's because they haven't tested it. Well, that may be true. But the science behind it is cream, milk, and dairy has a lot of fat in it. The butter fat that's in milk, in all kinds of dairy. Well, those butter fat molecules can surround a botulism spore and interfere with heat transfer. And so that means that they're not getting killed. But people still ring that elephant bell all the time and say, oh, we've done this all of our lives and nobody's ever gotten, we're 3 generations and we've canned our own milk because we have cows and none of us have ever gotten sick. Well, it's because no elephants are around. It's because no botulism spores were in the mix and you didn't kill them by whatever you did. All right, and then we've got to watch the amount of fat. So the next thing that we're going to do is take a look at these 2 recipes. So whenever I take a recipe off of the internet that I want to use to can my own soup recipe using that recipe, then I print it out and start making adjustments right away. So here are the adjustments that I made to the cream of chicken soup. I highlighted the butter, the flour, and the cream. Everything else in there is okay to be canned. Now for the cream of mushroom soup, and this Chef John's creamy mushroom soup, I really like him. He has such a kind voice. It's very reassuring. And I've marked out the same three things: the butter, the flour, and the cream. And so what do we do? Well, we're going to start with, and I have all of our ingredients right here. We're going to start with a mushroom soup. Now this is 32 ounces of mushrooms, and I want to show you a quick trick on, I bought these mushrooms, they were whole, and so I've sliced them all, which is a dreaded operation for me. But look how cool it is to use an egg slicer. And I have to admit that I did not come up with this myself. I got this egg slicer a long time ago to use with cutting strawberries. And I didn't even transfer that to the idea of cutting mushrooms until one of our viewers suggested that we just use an egg slicer to cut the mushrooms with, and it works brilliantly. So I love it. So thank you to that viewer for helping with this. So the first thing that we are to do in this mushroom soup is to melt the butter and saute the mushrooms with a pinch of salt. So I am going to use just a tablespoon of butter. It calls for 3 tablespoons of butter, but I'm not going to use that much fat. And if you look closely, and if you know what roux is, R-O-U-X, roux, I've done a couple of videos recently on roux, then you know that the butter, the extra butter that the mushrooms are going to be sauteing in, along with the flour, are going to create the roux that helps to thicken the soup. Well, we can't do that. And so I'm just going to be using barely enough of this ghee that we can have a little bit in the bottom. Mushrooms are great because they give up their own liquid, and then pretty quickly we're going to have plenty of liquid in the bottom. A really important part of this recipe is to, once the mushrooms are sauteed in that butter and they give up their liquid, there's going to be about this much liquid in the bottom of the pan. And we have to continue cooking that until all of that liquid is evaporated and the mushrooms are a golden brown color. And that's really integral to the taste of this soup. So we're going to then move that onto the back burner over behind the whiteboard, and we're going to continue that kind of off camera over there while we then work on the chicken soup. All right, and I'm just going to get the salt and just a pinch of salt. So I'm going to stir these and keep stirring them until they give up their liquid, at which time we're going to move this to the back burner and I will bring you back. I'm now starting, the mushrooms are on the back burner. They haven't given up their liquid yet. I'll bring them out to show you when that happens so you can see it. But we're going to make good use of our time and go ahead and start on the cream of chicken. So I have done the very same thing and put only 1 tablespoon of ghee in this bowl, in this pot. And now I'm adding the onions, the celery, and the carrots. And they have to cook and saute for about 12 minutes. Now, because we're not using the same amount of fat, it's important to kind of keep things stirred up a little bit. So I'll be coming back to do that. We're going to cover these and let them get to the point where we can do the next step. And I'm going to go back and work with the mushrooms, so I'll see you soon. The mushrooms have started giving up their liquid. You can see how wet they are. We're not anywhere near done. So they will be giving up a lot more liquid, and we're going to keep cooking that until all the liquid has been evaporated and the mushrooms are golden brown. So back to the back area, and we're going to finish this. All right, so these veggies, they also are giving up a little bit of liquid, not a lot, but they are done to the point that we need. And we may not need to do it as long as the recipe calls for, because remember, The recipe is intended for pan to table serving. We're going to be putting them through a 60-minute cooking time in the canner. They're going to process for 60 minutes. So it's okay if these aren't all the way done. So remember that when you are doing it. So now it calls for 7 cups of broth. This is the infamous chicken broth that we did the other day where we had the explosive siphoning that shocked a lot of people, including us. Okay, so there's 7 cups of chicken broth. And then to that, we are going to add a bundle. And this is thyme, it is parsley, and a bay leaf. And so I'm just going to submerge that. They're tied with the strings for easy retrieval. And we're going to let that simmer for just a few minutes. Now, what we are wanting to do here is, yes, we want the flavor of those herbs into the soup, but we're not going to simmer it for a full 15 minutes. We're going to bring it to a boil, and then we're going to add the chicken. This is the chicken that we are adding. We've done a recent video on preparing chicken for your freezer. Now, this calls for 2 3/4 cups of cooked and diced chicken. This is only about just a little bit over a cup and a half. I don't ever feel the need to have a ton of meat in my soups, and so I will often not use the amount of meat called for. I do sometimes, but I'm not going to this time. And so we're just going to use this. This was frozen. I thawed it this morning. Though many of you know that we are working on getting our freezer organized, and that's part of our freezer organization activity. All right, so we want to bring that to a boil, and then we're going to add the chicken and heat the chicken up, and then we are ready to jar up this soup. And I'll show you how we will do that when we get there. I'm adding the chicken. This is boiling. And we're just going to make sure it comes back to a boil, signaling that the chicken is heated. I'm going to add a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And as soon as that's back to a boil, we're going to be adding it to the jars. So I'm starting to fill jars, and what we need to ensure is that we have a balance. Here is the herb packet. I'm just going to remove it. We need to ensure that each jar has about a mixture of half solids and half liquid. That's part of what the USDA expects. And then we have an inch of headspace. And I'm filling hot jars with hot soup. I'm going to put them in a canner that has some hot water in it. We're going to be using the Instant Pot Max. Now, the reason that we need about 50% of the solids in there is so that that liquid will give us really good heat transfer. Just a little bit more. I have this much left. We will see what happens when we get the mushroom soup jarred up. We may have room in our second canner for that one. One of the things that helps diminish the possibility of siphoning is to ensure that there are no air pockets down among all of those solids. Then I have a vinegar dampened towel that we are using to wipe off the rims. We want to be sure that the rims are all squeaky clean. Placing the lids, new lids, and then giving it a finger tight screw. Checking the water, we need a little bit more water. I have some hot water right here ready. The water needs to come up on the jars just a little bit more. I am going to not pressure cook, but I'm going to do canning. And I'm going to set the time for 60 minutes. Not 1 hour and 60 minutes, just 60 minutes, which may jump over to an hour. All right, and then I've got venting, no venting, it's got to come down on its own. And we are ready to go. This little canner I love because it tells me what the internal temperature is. As soon as I start, it's going to read the temperature on the inside, which is 90 degrees. And then it is going to take care of the venting on its own. You'll hardly notice that, but it does it. And then this will be up to above 240 for enough time so that any possibility of botulism spores will be killed. So we are going and just going to leave it alone. Now we're going to finish up with the mushrooms. All right, you can see the mushrooms are now completely cooked and they are as caramelized as they are going to get. Okay, so next step for the mushroom soup is to add the onions and cook until they are translucent, which we will do. And we will be back when that is done. I just added the 4 cups of broth and 1 cup of water to the mushrooms. I'm now dropping in the fresh thyme. This is a different packet than the one I made 2 packets this morning of these little herbs. I'm going to add a little salt and pepper. And we are supposed to bring this to a simmer, and then we need to simmer it for an hour with the packet in there. No, we're not going to simmer it for an hour because we're going to process it for an hour. I'm just not going to leave the, that's not the lid for this, it's the closest one I have. I'm not going to leave the herb packet in it when we can it. So we're going to let it simmer for probably 10 minutes. Then I'm going to jar it up and get it in the canner. And we won't be back until the canners are finished and we can take our soups out of the canners. The other canner that I'm using is just my Nesco, and I'm going to put 4 pints in there, maybe 3 pints of mushroom, and I'll reheat the chicken soup and put another pint of the chicken soup in, or I will just freeze the rest of the chicken soup one way or the other. All right, we will see you soon. We are back and it is the next day. We decided to leave our jars overnight so they could cool completely. Here are the results to our canning. This is the chicken and this is the mushroom. And you'll notice that they are both very, very liquidy. There's about half of solids and half of liquids in the jars. And they all sealed and turned out just great. So let's review where we are. So first of all, we talked about commercial, both dry and canned, that you can stock your shelves with. But then this whole class is focusing on number 2, which is do-it-yourself in the making and the preserving of cream soups. And we can do that with our dry mixes that gave you the links for that are on your information sheet. Those little jars of the powdered soups that I showed you are now 2 years old. Most of my dehydrated vegetables, they will last a good year. Those soups were 2 years old, and I thought, oh gosh, we better taste test those. And so, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, as I was preparing for this class, I brought those soups in, and Jim and I each had a bowl, and they were perfectly fine. So those powdered veggie soups work just great. If you want to powder your own vegetables, if you want to dry your own vegetables and then powder them and make those soups, that is a great way to have shelf-stable cream soups. Then we made the regular recipe. Well, I did this off camera. We talked about making the regular recipe. Now for the regular recipe, I have some that we just took right out of the pan, and that's right here. So this is the unadulterated regular recipe. This stack right here is the frozen, and they are in the microwave heating up a little bit. Still the same regular recipe with no adjustments. And then we put part of each of those recipes in the freeze dryer and got these 2 jars, and I have put a sample of each in these bowls. Then I've left these bowls for the canned. So we are going to take 1 jar of each, and then I'm going to move the rest out of the way because we now have to finish up what do we have to do to these to make them as much like this as possible. Okay, and then we've adjusted the recipe. Now, one of the things that the recipe for the mushroom soup called for was for us to have it be thick, then add the cream, and then run it through the blender. Well, we could not add the thickening agent because it had flour in it, and we certainly could not put the cream in. So we're going to do that to the mushroom soup. And we certainly cannot puree soups before we can them. So we should really add that to this list. No puree. I'm going to add just a little bit of hot water to each of these bowls so we can get these reconstituting. And we want these to be as thick as the original. And that's about it. And I need just a little bit more of that chicken. That is about right. So we will let those completely reconstitute, and I'm going to put these out of the way. These are hot. These are now hot. We need to work with these. Now we'll get ready to do the other soups. We're going to start with the mushroom soup. And I'm just going to pour it in this pot exactly like it is. Now we need to heat it up. And you may remember that we did not put all the butter in, nor did we put any of the flour in. And what was the purpose of that butter and flour? That was our thickening agent. Well, I just happen to have some butter and flour mixture right here in this roux. I love roux, and especially done this way that we have just done a video on. And I'll put the card to that right up here so you can check in on that if you like. But with this roux, we can thicken this just a little bit so that it is the same thickness as this. Look how thick this soup is. This is the original. It was freeze-dried, but even the original is very, very thick. And you can thin it down if you want, but Jim really, really likes it thick, so that's why I left it that thick. So that's the thickness that we are searching for now, that when we blend this up, the mushrooms are going to add to the thickness. So right now we're just going to add just a little bit of this roux to thicken up this so it's not so watery. All right, it is starting to bubble a little bit, so I'm just going to put about that much in and see what we get. Now, because this roux is flour mixed with the fat, it will melt. and not cause any lumps, which is just great. So it no longer looks like water. It's a little thick. Oh, this is perfect. I'm going to turn the heat off. And with this soup, it called for a cup of cream. And we got 4 pints of the mushroom soup. So that means we need to put 1/4 of a cup of cream in this 1 pint of soup. So I'm going to fill my half cup about half full and pour that in, whisk it around. Oh, does that look good? You could probably eat it just like this. But instead, we are going to do what the recipe calls for and blend it all up. Okay, this one is done. Steamy hot, nice and thick. Those mushrooms really thickened it up beautifully, and it is the perfect thickness. Okay, there's enough for our taste test. Next up is the chicken soup. All right, I'm turning this on, and we are dumping our whole pint of the chicken soup. Now with this chicken soup, you may remember that I had some left over in the pan. And because the mushroom soup ended up producing 4 pints, I simply froze that last amount, added the cream to it, and froze it. So all we need to do with this one is to just thicken it up a little bit and add the cream. Now there was, for that one, and the chicken soup made about just short of 6 pints. And so when we divide 6 into 1/2 cup of cream, it comes up to just a little bit over a tablespoon. So we'll be putting a little over a tablespoon of cream in this one after we thicken it up just a little bit. Now we don't want this thick like stew, we just don't want it to be like water. And so as soon as this starts to boil a little bit, we will add just a little bit of ghee, about the same amount we did to the mushroom soup. We'll see how that does. Let that cook for a minute. And we don't need to follow the amounts that were in the recipe because we are working with a much smaller amount here. And so we can just adjust as we go according to our own taste. So I want this just a little bit thicker. That's it. And we're going to measure out a couple of these spoons of cream, which will give us just a little bit more than a tablespoon. I'm turning this off, stirring it up, and that is perfect. Oh, wow. And we are going to put 1/2 cup of that one right here. And we're going to put these right here. This is the fresh one right out of the pan, still hot. And the chicken soup, taking a clean spoon and stirring it just a little bit. and putting a little bit right there. And now I will get out of the microwave the ones that were frozen. All right, I have clean spoons set out here for the taste test. This is the one I use to stir. So this is the one that we are going to judge everything else by. That mushroom soup is to die for. Thick, full flavored. All right, how does this taste compared to that one?
So which one is the one you just?
The signs are right here.
Well, I'm
So here's
horrible.
frozen. This is the one that was frozen, and that tastes exactly like this first one. These are the ones that were freeze-dried. The taste is identical. The texture is, well, it's a little bit thicker. So that could have been just the amount of water that I put in, but the taste is identical. And then this is the one that we adjusted the recipe canned and just fixed right here this morning. The taste is different. It is not quite as full-bodied, but it's really, really good. So these are identical. This taste is, it just tastes a little bit thinner, but it is perfectly delicious. Okay, I'm going to rinse my spoons and go to the chicken roe. All right, so this is the fresh one. And I'm just going mostly for the broth. Oh, that is the best cream of chicken soup I have ever tasted. I think I can hardly ever go back to Campbell's canned cream of chicken soup. This is fantastic. So how does the frozen compare? Identical. And the freeze-dried? It's very good. Not quite as good as these, but that could have had to do with the amount of water that I added to the amount of the powdered soup. It's just, it tastes a little bit thinner than this does. And then what about the canned? The canned is really, really good, but once again, it does not have quite the flavor that these do. One of the things that I am learning is that when we process foods in different ways, it does change the texture and the taste. And if we ever have to be to a point where we are living off of our food storage, we will be very thankful to have whatever it is that we have. And the little bit of taste or texture difference among these four will not mean anything to us if all we have is canned or if all we have is freeze-dried, if we don't have the availability of making the fresh soup. But I'll tell you, I am sold on freezing portions of these soups because they turned out identical to the fresh. So these are several ways that you can make cream soups shelf stable in whatever way you wish to do so. One of the things that I wanted to comment on was that chicken soup. At this point in time, we have a foundation that we could go several directions with, not just adding cream and thickening it up, but we could also turn it into chicken noodle soup or chicken and rice soup by having some cooked noodles or some cooked rice that we can add in and heat up after we open it. So having a base of chicken soup canned using our own recipe is really a great thing to have on our food storage shelves because it becomes very versatile. Now, the cream of mushroom soup is not quite that versatile. We wouldn't want to add pasta or rice to that. Maybe we would, I don't know. But I'll tell you, that mushroom soup is to die for. It is the best mushroom soup and the best cream of chicken soup I've ever had. One of the things I wanted to just chat with you about for a moment is we're really lucky right now because we can go to the store and get heavy cream if we need it. Or if you have a cow, you have all the cream you need. But in a grid down long-term situation, we may not have the availability to do that. So the alternatives that we could use to turn these into cream soups would be powdered milk or evaporated milk. Those would be two options that we could use. Also, there are a number of dried milks. I mean, there's dried almond milk, there's dried goat's milk, there's dried this milk, there's dried that milk. So whatever it is that your family favors, if you store enough to use in things like this, then you have alternatives to fresh cream. So that concludes our class for this time around. I hope you found this helpful, and I wish you the best of adventuring when you try out these cream soups and figure out how you would like to make them shelf stable for your family. So thanks for joining us for this class. Spread the word. Please subscribe if you have not already. The next thing that we're going to be doing on the Rose Red Homestead is making cheeses and yogurts out of powdered milk. I thought about doing a class on that, but there's way too much information to just try to compact it into a 1-hour class. So we'll be doing a series of videos on what we can do with powdered milk. So thanks again for being with us, and we will see you at our next RRH class.